let me respectfully invite Honorable Information Minister and Member for Ofuasia Yiribi to second the motion. Honorable, you have the floor now.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to second this motion. And I rise to second the motion ably moved by the Minister responsible for Finance last week on Wednesday, the 15th of November 2023, that this Honorable House approves the economic policy for 2024 and approves the budget for 2024 as well. Speaker, in so doing, let me commend the team from the Ministry of Finance that spent some time with us over the weekend explaining to members the details of the budget and economic policy, the rationale, and helping colleagues have a deep understanding of what has informed this policy. I also want to commend the Parliamentary Service, the clerk and the team, Mr. Speaker himself, for the innovative way in which this year's workshop was structured. It was very helpful in helping get a deep understanding, and we pray that it may continue in this dimension. Mr. Speaker, my submission this morning in seconding the motion is separated in three major parts. First, I want to speak to the economic policy that is outlined from pages 1 to 164 of the document that we received. And then I'll speak to the budget proper from page 165 ongoing, including the fiscal tables there. And then, Mr. Speaker, there are some persons who are responsible, in my view, for ensuring that the budget performs and that it translates into the economic policy goals. And I'll be taking some time to call these persons out and ask that we all focus some attention on them to ensure that we succeed. So, Mr. Speaker, let me start with the economic policy. And in dealing with the economic policy, Mr. Speaker, it's important to understand the context within which this economic policy has been formulated. We are putting this economic policy before Parliament at a time when the global economy is challenged and the Ghanaian economy is challenged as well. We are putting it before Parliament at a time when there's a high cost of living all over the world and in Ghana as well. If you switch on your television, one of the slides you will find from CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC is the cost of living crisis and how various countries are responding to it. In America, they've passed the Inflation Reduction Act to respond to this cost of living challenge. In the UK, they tried the energy price cap guarantee to try and respond to it. So the second thing to note is that we are doing this at a time when there's a high cost of living. We are doing this at a time also when there's a fiscal crisis in many parts of the world manifesting in a high debt situation, and many countries are trooping to international partners to try and deal with their debt. And then also we are doing this fourthly at a time when growth is challenged. The Ghanaian economy that was growing at an average 7% between 2017 and 2019 has now just been growing around 1.5 thereabouts. So the context within which this economic policy has been brought to this House is that the economy is challenged, cost of living is high, debt levels are high, and growth is down. Mr. Speaker, therefore, if you are promoting an economic program, the question is, what must this economic program seek to achieve? Number one, a program at this time must seek to bring back stability. If inflation is sitting around 50%, no businessman can be satisfied to do business. If exchange rate volatilities are causing currency to be depreciating at the levels that we were seeing a couple of years ago, no businessman can happily do business. Mr. Speaker, therefore, the first objective of any sound economic policy or economic program at this time should be to bring back stability. Mr. Speaker, if you look at this program, pages 1 to 164, as I mentioned, where you find the full outline of the economic program, you'll find that the objective number one is stability. To bring the cost of living down to a level that our fellow compatriots in this country can accommodate. Inflation sitting somewhere around the 50s, brought down or being brought down this year currently to about 32%. And the forecast is that in the 2024 financial year, to bring inflation further down to 15%. Mr. Speaker, If anybody says that an economic program like this is useless or is empty, that cannot be true. This economic program, Mr. Speaker, is a program that is sound, that is sensible, that is pragmatic, and I believe that every single member of this House must support a program that seeks to bring down inflation from the mid-30s down to 15% by the end of the 2024 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, look at the exchange rate. This economic program before us seeks to ensure that the stability that has returned to the exchange markets will be maintained. And that those days when you wake up in the morning and you see one rate, and by the time you are coming back home, the rate has changed, will be things of the past. An economic program in a measure like that is one that I believe every single member of this House must support because it is sensible, it is pragmatic, that is what the people of Ghana are looking for. Mr. Speaker, the Bank of Ghana has mentioned that it's operating a tight monetary policy to help bring inflation down. So understandably, interest rates are still high. But they have made the point, and the point is quite well outlined in this economic policy, that when they are successful with that, we'll begin to see the interest rate come down again. So, Mr. Speaker, item number one, which is stability, is something that is pragmatic, it is sensible, and we must all support as part of this economic program before us. Mr. Speaker, another matter that the economic policy before us speaks to is a question of growth. We are programming an average of 2.8% growth for the year 2024 without any measures. That's what they like to say in their economics class, ceteris paribus, without any measures, all things being equal. But Mr. Speaker, the challenge that the President put before his economic management team was to answer the question, how do we grow faster than 2.8? We understand that the whole global economy has been in distress and growth levels have been downgraded. But how do we grow faster than the 2.8 that is being programmed for Ghana? And that is why, as the Finance Minister mentioned, a subcommittee at the EMT was put in place to develop a growth program aimed at ensuring that we grow faster than the 2.8. And Mr. Speaker, the economic policy outlines the 5 areas that this growth program is focusing on: agriculture, aquaculture, tourism, creative arts and sports, digitization on one level, and then trade and industry on the other level. The question is, do these areas represent areas where if we invest discretionary expenditure, we will be able to get growth higher than 2.8? Respectfully, Mr. Speaker, I don't think any economist worth his salt would disagree with that. And so you will find that the economic program before us responds to the question of growth. Why is growth important? Growth is important because as growth goes higher, jobs are created. As jobs are created, people get incomes. As they get incomes, they improve their quality of life. And so for us as an administration, it is key to ensure that we don't just take the 2.8% estimated growth, but we put in place a clear growth program aimed at taking us beyond this 2.8. And Mr. Speaker, later, when we look at the budget or the fiscals, we will find that allocations have been made to back this economic policy. Mr. Speaker, the third part of the economic policy that I want to highlight is the development agenda. Growth must translate into some development. And you will find that the very simple way that the administration has put it is that we are looking to continue projects that have been started, not necessarily start new projects that have not been funded. We're looking to complete the projects that have been started and to crowd in some more resources to achieve that. So, Mr. Speaker, on the first part of our conversation, which is dealing with the economic policy that has been put before us, I believe this House must come to the view that this economic policy is sensible, it is pragmatic, and it should be supported. The claim that it is empty, it is useless, cannot be sustained, because it is these same objectives that the people of Ghana are looking forward to. Mr. Speaker, I want to now go to the budget proper, where you find the numbers, to examine whether or not the numbers support the economic policy. And in so doing, Mr. Speaker, I want to draw the attention of the House to Appendix 4A and request colleagues to join in examining the allocations that have been made to these specific areas that have been selected to engineer the growth we are looking for. Because the best growth plan without allocation and execution is just black ink on white paper, Mr. Speaker. So on Appendix 4A, item number 15, Food and Agriculture, you will find that, Mr. Speaker, a whopping 3 billion Ghana cedis has been allocated to support the agricultural sector, specifically about 700 million Ghana cedis to support the Planting for Food and Jobs program, and about 525 million Ghana cedis to deal with agri-infrastructure extension across this country. Mr. Speaker, you find therefore that in the budget, the allocations are supporting the economic objectives that we have set. Mr. Speaker, item 16, the Ministry of Fisheries and Aquaculture Development, an unprecedented 298 million Ghana cedis to ensure that aquaculture can be promoted, to ensure that we can reduce our importation of fish, to ensure that we can create a lot more jobs and save foreign exchange in our exercise in that nature. Mr. Speaker, take trade and industry. 1 billion Ghana cedis allocation to trade and industry, out of which you will find specific allocations of about 123 million to support the One District, One Factory program, and about 13 million to support other interventions in that ministry. Mr. Speaker, tourism, arts, and culture receives a whopping 175 million Ghana cedis in the 2024 budget to stimulate activities in that sector so that we can grow and create some jobs, some more in that area. And finally, in the area of digitization, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Communications and Digitalization, item 25, 1.2 billion Ghana cedis. And you'll see the breakdown of allocations, including about 200 million Ghana cedis to support young Ghanaians in the youth digital village. So, Mr. Speaker, when you speak of the budget, the allocations herein in the budget go a long way to support the economic program that the government has put out there. Mr. Speaker, delving into the question of expenditure some more, it is important to draw attention to the fiscal framework and to look at expenditure in particular. Mr. Speaker, we've been saying for a while in this country, cut expenditure, cut expenditure, cut expenditure. That if the government is committed, it should cut expenditure. And the administration introduced a number of measures aimed at cutting expenditure. For example, the salaries of government officials were slashed by about 30%, foreign travels were contained, acquisition of vehicles, etc. were contained. Mr. Speaker, the evidence is now showing in the books. Prior to 2023, expenditure on a commitment basis, which is a better way of measuring than expenditure on a cash basis, expenditure on a commitment basis was 27% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the projected outturn is that we will be dropping about 7 points expenditure as a percentage of GDP on a commitment basis. Mr. Speaker, that is the clearest evidence you will find that our common desire, which is to cut expenditure, is manifesting. And Mr. Speaker, even the medium-term program suggests that next year we shouldn't do more than 21% of GDP, and in subsequent years we should stay within that expenditure threshold. Mr. Speaker, this is the evidence that a government or an administration is committed to cutting expenditure, to containing expenditure. But Mr. Speaker, while we are happy on the expenditure side, I think there's something that needs to be said on the revenue side. Today, tax revenue as a percentage of GDP is sitting somewhere around 13%. Total revenue and grants, if you escalate it, about 16 or 15% plus. Mr. Speaker, in this chamber, we have made the argument over and over again that for an OECD country, we should be raising about 25% of GDP. People are creating the GDP, the productivity is there. But how much of it is coming back to the national kitty to fund the development agenda that we are looking for? Mr. Speaker, while we understand and commend the policymakers that in these times, you can only project to grow maybe just about 0.9% of GDP, about 11 billion cedis in nominal terms, we think that a lot more work needs to be done moving forward to ensure that the revenue generation exercise is more successful. Because if we don't raise the revenue, we are left with what? Borrowing. And we can't borrow our way out of the problems. So, Mr. Speaker, again, you will notice that in the medium-term program, we are projecting to grow revenues to about 20% of GDP by 2028. So it's understandable that under the current difficulties, 16% thereabout, just 0.9% increase, but by 2028, try and get to about 20% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, still talking of expenditure, I want to speak briefly about debt servicing. If you look at the fiscal tables from the previous year, you will find a difference of about 6 billion, what people like to call savings. I don't call it savings. 6 billion cutback on CDs, 6 billion CDs on estimated interest expenses or debt servicing. That is what translates into the savings from what you call the domestic debt exchange program. And Mr. Speaker, it is programmed that over the about 10-year period, we are going to save about 60 billion CDs from this domestic debt exchange program that we have gone through. Mr. Speaker, that 6 billion per annum, that 6 billion average per annum is fiscal space that helps us to cut back on our deficits, even if it will not translate into any new expenditure items as well. And so, Mr. Speaker, again, you realize that we are doing better on the debt management program. Still talking of debt, another indicator, the deficit. Mr. Speaker, we were running negative 4.5 deficits just a couple of years ago. This year, the program is to bring us to negative 0.5. And next year, to take us to positive 0.5. Mr. Speaker, that's one of the steepest consolidation exercises we have ever done in our history. A very steep one. And Mr. Speaker, sorry, that's the primary balance, I beg your pardon. And Mr. Speaker, what it is doing is that it is ensuring that in terms of our expenditure containment measures, we are staying on track. And so, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the budget itself, it is obvious that this budget is healthy. This budget is being set in a framework that is sustainable moving forward. And what we have to do is to ensure that we stay on that path. Mr. Speaker, the final part of my submission is to speak to the question of responsibility. So is it true that it is the government alone that bears full responsibility for ensuring that first, the budget performs, and second, the economic policy objectives are achieved? I don't think so, Mr. Speaker. I think that there are many other stakeholders who bear responsibility. Very often we, the political class, just point fingers at ourselves, and we don't raise the issue of everybody's responsibility. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to spend a few minutes to speak and to call out the responsibilities of various stakeholders if this budget program will succeed and if it will translate into the economic objectives we are looking at. The Ministry of Finance have done their part. They've brought what we will consider as a sensible and pragmatic economic program. The budget makes sense. Parliament now has a responsibility to examine, to debate, and to approve this. If we shirk that responsibility, there will be consequences down the line. And we cannot blame the government if we shirk our responsibility. Mr. Speaker, the Ghana Revenue Authority, they have a responsibility. When we are done and we have passed the Appropriation Act and we have passed the revenue measures, the implementation to ensure that the revenue numbers are achieved rest with them. We were in this house when in 2017-2018, we passed the Taxation Fiscal Electronic Devices Act. Mr. Speaker, till today, implementation is a question that is in front of all of us. And so there's a responsibility on that side to implement as well what has been approved in this house. Mr. Speaker, the ministries, departments, and agencies, chief directors, civil servants, ministers of state, chief executives, we also have a responsibility to ensure that the programs that have been outlined to deliver on the economic objectives are implemented on time and within budget. It's one thing to publish the program, it's another thing to make the budget allocation. But if we, who have been given the responsibility, do not ensure that these programs are executed in accordance with timelines and efficiently, not much will be achieved. Mr. Speaker, parliamentary oversight. Parliamentary oversight. We have a responsibility in this chamber that when programs are approved and funds are allocated, we hold the agencies and the heads of these agencies accountable for the implementation of these programs. If we don't, we can have a nice debate here, we can vote, we can have a nice economic policy, it won't translate to much. And so, Mr. Speaker, those responsibilities must also be borne in mind. And then finally, Mr. Speaker, very finally, citizens. The government does not have money lying down somewhere. The government raises the revenues to fund the programs. This year, 0% financing from the central bank. So, Mr. Speaker, to conclude.
Honourable Minister, your time is getting up.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Citizens have a responsibility as well. And our ability to each fulfill our obligations is what will translate into fulfillment. So, Mr. Speaker, this economic policy is sensible and pragmatic. The budget is healthy and sensible. We all have a responsibility. Let us live up to it so that we achieve the objectives. Let us avoid excessive partisanship so that we can achieve the objectives. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.